Welcome everyone to this very, very important video where we will go into the Trump master plan for Europe and the world. This is extremely important if you live in America, in Russia, or in Europe, or anywhere on the planet, because this will shape the world to come over the next 4 years. So before I start, I want to make an appeal to everyone who is watching. I think we can categorize you guys into two clusters. One that is not directly affected by the war in Ukraine and the threat in Eastern Europe of Russia. And I think if you live in Texas, if you live in California, you have a much easier time thinking about these things very rationally and very theoretically, right? You look at the globe, you understand the geopolitics, and you draw your conclusions. But we need to understand if you're Ukrainian, if you're Polish, if you're Estonian, if you're Finnish, you are directly bordering Russia. And this whole thing is very, very scary. So I want to address that to make clear that I feel you guys if you are living in these areas and that I understand what kind of personal threat Russia poses to you. So this having said, I think it's very important when we look at the world and we want to understand what's happening and we want to be prepared to do the right thing, to not be emotional, but to be rational. Because the first condition to really understand the world is truth, and to truly understand in a cold-blooded analytical way what is actually going on. So I just wanted to start this video with that, so you don't think I'm heartless or I don't understand, the troubles and the fears in the population. So let's first start with understanding the mindset of the key players in this whole situation. And I will go into Trump's mindset to convey to you what I think is going on in Trump's mind and his worldview, quickly into Putin's mindset, who is an important part of that, and into the mindset of EU leadership. And once we understand that, we will take a quick look at the macro situation of the world and the Western world and China and Russia that has to do with the AI singularity and the tremendous transformation that is happening in parallel to all these political considerations. And then we finally go to the Trump master plan and discuss what it means, what is good about it, and what is potentially bad about it. And I hope this video equips you with the right mental and intellectual tools to assess the world more rationally and predict what's going to happen more accurately. And in the end, I will go quickly into what it all means for us here, what you and me should do about this. Okay, let's start with Trump's mindset. I will share my screen for just some notes so you see what I'm considering when I read this, and maybe that's helpful to just follow. You don't have to read it, but maybe it's helpful. So when we think about Trump and what's going on in Trump's mind, I think the central book to understand Trump is actually The Art of the Deal. It's a book he wrote with a co-author, and it's a brilliant book. It describes his deal-making approach, and it also tells us what Trump is all about. Trump is a deal maker. He is a real estate builder. He builds hotels, and he's good in media businesses that he runs. And there's not much else going on in Trump's mind, in my opinion. He is a deal maker. He wants to win. He wants the people around him to win, who are loyal to him. And that extends to America. He wants America to win. And people make fun that he just says, oh, I want to win bigly. That's actually what he wants. He wants to win, and winning for him means economic, money winning. So there's not much else going on there. Trump views the world through a purely economic lens and deals. And he wants to use power and leverage, which is economic and money leverage, to make more money for his country and everyone involved. And that also means that everything else is secondary. There are secondary fields of interest that are directly linked into his money-focused worldview, which is technology in Silicon Valley. I don't think Trump fully understands it, but he's very good with people. He understands that Elon understands technology. He understands that David Sachs understands technology. He has great respect for these Silicon Valley movers and shakers who are loyal to him if he thinks they're smart and rich, which many of them are. So that is Elon Musk, David Sachs, Chamath Palihapitiya, Mark Andreessen, many more, who are in a very close circle with him behind the scenes. Increasingly, Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos, who switched sides pretty clearly towards Trump. And there's a whole range of additional billionaires who go beyond Silicon Valley into oil and gas and finance, who are also very close to Trump. And for Trump, that is the center of the universe, these people. And he's not wrong about it. He also despises leftism and the loser mindset that he calls the loser mindset. So everyone who's about other things than money, who says, oh, maybe money is not important. Maybe we should be more poor. Maybe we should redistribute. Maybe we as a country are not great. Maybe we should open our borders. Maybe our culture sucks. All these things that you can debate all day long. For Trump, you just look like a total loser and he will despise you, both in the United States and outside. It will be very important when we look at other leaders like Putin, EU leadership, and others. So that generally makes Trump very strong in winning. In his sense, winning. He's great at making deals. He's great at exerting leverage. He's great at understanding how he makes other people do what he wants, including other nations, because he understands in the end it's about financial deals. It makes him relatively weak in strategic civilization building, because I think he has some blind spots when it comes to culture, to values, and long-term things. But if you win short-term, that's a very strong quality. Now let's quickly go over Putin's mindset. Not going to waste too much time, but Putin is important in this whole game, as we know. Putin is a former KGB agent. He worked in Germany. He likes Germany, by the way, because he has personal connections from back in the days in the GDR. And he's into power. He's into strategy. He's ruthlessly rational, and he's not delusional. It's all very important. Of course, he wants to make Russia powerful as possible. He wants to stay in power, and he's willing to do whatever it takes for that. When it comes to Ukraine, I think what we all need to understand, because this will be an important piece here, there's this debate who's at fault. Some on the right in MAGA say it's the Americans' fault. Most others, mainstream, say it's Putin's fault. And I think the truth is very simple. Putin said for a decade before, if you turn Ukraine into a NATO country, I will attack it. I will launch a war. And the Americans said, well, that's great. We want a war. Let's push for NATO membership. And then Putin attacks Ukraine. That's exactly what happened. So who's at fault? Is the guy at fault who says, if you cross my line, I'm going to wage a war? Or is the guy at fault who says, great, I'm going to cross the line? I think that's debatable, but that's just the reality of what happened. Maybe both are at fault here, but especially the United States wanted the war. I think Putin did not want the war, but was willing to threaten it and was willing to wage it. So that's the situation. I think Putin also understands the US very well. He understands the deep state very well. He understands the deep state wants to destroy Russia and wage a war against Russia. He also respects Trump. He also understands the other side in America who doesn't want that. And he's being a KGB agent about it. He also has a personal, despise for Western decadence, as he calls it. So all the things that Trump also doesn't like, which makes him to some point ideologically a little aligned. Then finally, the EU mindset. So what does the EU leaders think? First of all, I think there are only two parties in Europe that really matter, which is Germany and France. The UK is technically not Europe anymore. It's also not that important in this whole thing. And Trump despises both the French and UK leadership. He doesn't like their weakness, their mass migration things, their chaos. I think with Germany, Trump likes them even less, because the Germans are not just equally weak to the French and UK leadership, but on top of it, they're also a little abrasive and arrogant towards Trump. Whereas France and UK leadership kiss up to Trump pretty badly, as you see with Macron and Starmer, who just was in Washington. Whereas the Germans constantly bash Trump, which is not very smart, by the way. But Trump likes them even less. I think J.D. Vance, who's important, I will go into this in a second, is more friendly towards Germany. He's more, influenced by Thiel, and he sees more strategically the whole situation on a cultural level and understands the importance of Germany. So I think Vance tends to be very German friendly, more than Trump. And both have very good intel, I think, on the new alternative parties in Europe, especially on the AfD in Germany, and of course view them as an ally to clean up this whole thing. Finally, before we go into Trump's master plan, Trump's plan how to manage geostrategy, which will be very important to understand. finally, we have to take a step back from all these players and look at the macro situation of the world. And there's one thing that is unparalleled and unprecedented in history that defines our age, these 2020s we live in, and that is the AI singularity. While we are all caught up in, oh, there's Russia, there's Europe, there's the United States, there's Trump, something much, much bigger is happening. Something so important that everything else that happened before in human history will pale in comparison. And that is the AI singularity. We are living through an age of extreme and total transformation that the vast majority of people has not fully recognized yet, but will be forced to fully recognize in the next 36 months. It will be massive and it will be disruptive. The people who truly understand it are the AI leaders, Elon Musk, again, the usual suspects, David Sachs, Chamath, Zuckerberg, Bezos, Jensen Huang of NVIDIA. These are the people who truly understand it. Maybe even not to the full extent, but they are driving this whole thing. It means all jobs will be gone very, very soon. In the next 5 years, no jobs will be left. No human jobs will be left, except for one, of course, reality engineers. But any doctor, lawyer, administrator of any sort will be gone. White collar jobs will be useless, replaced by AI. And then all physical jobs will be replaced by humanoid robots, I think much faster than people think in the next 5 years. When I say replaced, by the way, I don't mean that all jobs will be actually gone, but all hiring will stop and more people will get laid off. It will be very massive. And that will shift everything in the economy and therefore everything towards capital ownership, towards the people who own shares in these companies that will then suck up and accumulate all human economic value. So this is all, by the way, very dire. I'm not promoting this. I'm just telling you this is what's going to happen. And we better get very well prepared and find out what the role of humans will be in this whole thing. And we better do it fast. So that's the backdrop of this whole thing. Right now, the power shifts to the United States because they're the only country that fully understands it and fully embraces it and drives it. And I think China and Russia also understand it, but they can't drive it like that. China tries to drive it and has some success. The EU is completely clueless and is at risk of completely being left behind. That is the bigger picture. So what is Trump's master plan? Here's what I think the master plan is. First of all, his philosophy, based on what we learn now. He wants to always absolutely maximize economic power and do all his deals backed by extreme economic power. That's how he uses tariffs and all these other things. He wants to minimize wars. Trump is a hardcore anti-war president, which is something I really like about him. But he hates war because war is a distraction and war is destruction of value. And Trump is all about money. You can't make money with wars, despite what people think. The only people who can make money with wars are bad people and defense contractors. That's a tiny sliver of the economy. Everyone else loses. So wars are actually not good. If deployed, maybe effectively, mini wars could be helpful sometimes, but any kind of larger conflict is bad. And for Trump. So his objective is to accumulate maximum economic leverage for the US in every deal he does. And he's into making deals quickly. You see this with Gaza, where we have an age-old, millennia-old conflict, whatever you want to say, that is very irrational, very religiously driven, extremely tribal on both sides. And now Trump moves in. He has no interest in understanding any of these things. And in his worldview, he says, who cares? This is real estate at the Mediterranean. It's super valuable and it's being wasted by these people who constantly, shoot each other. It's horrible. Of course, that seems distasteful to many, but it doesn't matter because that's how Trump thinks. He wants to seize the real estate and turn it into hotels. Now that's appalling to many, but to Trump, it's like, well, whatever. Everyone needs food. All the Palestinian families need an economy. The Israelis want an economy. The Arab nations also want an economy. For Trump, they're just talking and shooting each other all day long and are being totally useless, and he's tired of it. He says, I'm making a deal. You all get a little money and shut up. That's how he thinks. And he will be successful with that because in the end, people actually want money. The families want money, the governments want money, and Trump is working on a deal where everyone makes money. So again, we can scream about it and whine. That's how he thinks, and he tends to be right about it. When it comes to the larger strategy or larger philosophy, for him, everything is noise with the exception of China. China is the number one threat to the United States because they have a massive economy. They're massively improving in AI, which is the only thing that actually matters. And all the supply chains for AI, which is rare earth, commodities, some intellectual property, chips. So Trump's entire global strategy evolves around that problem. How do we mitigate China? And the first thing he wants, that's why he talks about Canada and making Canada the fifth state, Greenland, somehow acquiring Greenland, and Ukraine, commodity deals he does, and also Russia. I'll get to this in a second. For Trump, all these things are puzzle pieces to control China and become less dependent of China in the AI supply chains. So, and that's not a dumb plan, right? If you would kind of control Greenland and Canada and Ukraine, you would more or less be able to replace the dependency on Chinese rare earth commodities. So let's get to his master plan and strategy. This was the background. The background is, here comes the shocker. There's one big shocker I have in this whole video. And the shocker is, if you understand all these little moving pieces and understand Trump's rationale of the world, there's only one conclusion you can strike. Only one conclusion. Russia is not the enemy of the United States in Trump's world, but Russia is the central strategic partner of the United States. I guarantee you, Trump wants a US-Russian axis. He wants an axis. Why? Because by doing so, he kind of encircles Europe. Europe will become not just totally dependent right now, but completely dependent. Europe will actually like it in the end. They will scream a little bit, but of course, Russia offers enormous benefits to Europe. All the oil, the gas, cheap energy, commodities, huge trading partnerships. So once you lift the wheel from your eyes and say, well, Russia as an economic partner is just huge for Europe. There's one downside that makes Europeans scared of Russia, and that is by doing so, we empower Russia, we make it much richer. So if Russia wants to exert military aggression, we fuel their military machine that threatens Europe. But of course, Trump is going to say that's bullshit. Who wants war? Putin doesn't want war. And if he wants war, it would be devastating for both countries because then he had to attack NATO. So I understand that people are very scared about it, to strengthening Russia, but Trump's rationale is different. He says, I strengthen Russia and I strengthen America even more. Europe gets stronger too, and that benefits America too. And all three become strong enough to absolutely thwart China. Well, not absolutely, but curb it a lot. Whatever you think about it, I think, other strategists will say he's absolutely downplaying the military threat of Russia. I personally think Trump is right. I do not think Russia wants big military wars, but people will say the risk is too high. And if you really look into Putin's behavior, I know some people will really disagree with me because he just attacked Ukraine. But when you look at the background, how he attacked Ukraine, that was not a surprise. That was a line in the sand he drew. He communicated excessively, which means he didn't want to do it. And he said, don't do that. He said it over a decade again and again. He attacked the Crimea and all that kind of stuff to avoid a major war. And the Americans just pushed him into it, in my opinion. Now, you could argue, why is Putin making these threats? It's not his right to threaten other countries to attack them. But that's up for debate, right? We can debate this all day long. That's what he did. So if you look at this whole situation, there is definitely an argument to be made that Putin is absolutely not crazy, that he's absolutely not war hungry, and that if people would work with him, he would probably not attack anyone. Now, does he need to get managed? And is there always a power play? Yes. Would it be horrible if Russia becomes economically stronger than the West? Of course. Would we then have the risk that he becomes militarily more aggressive? Of course, but that's not the plan. The plan is maximum empowerment of the United States. That is Trump's plan. As a side effect, empowerment of Europe, and as a side effect, empowerment of Russia. Now, this axis for Trump meets his number two, the two most important criteria. Number one criteria, make the United States as rich and powerful as possible. And number two, make it independent of China, encircle China as much as possible, and take all the leverage off the table for China. Trump does not want a military conflict with China, but he wants all the chips in his hands to force China to comply, to not attack Taiwan, and all these things. Because that's the big question. Can China afford to attack Taiwan or not? And as long as the US has vital supply chain dependency on China, China could attack Taiwan because the US cannot afford to go into full-on economic war. But at the millisecond where the United States would become more independent through Greenland, Canada, Russia, Ukraine, this is over for China. So, in addition, alienating Russia always creates this Russia-China axis, which is very unhealthy for the West. Then, this is the master plan, the Russia-America axis, which is a violation of all existing, policy strategies and philosophies in Western Europe and the United States. So it's a huge, huge pivot. But I'm 100% sure that's Trump's plan. And Ukraine also just as a commodity provider to the United States. He already struck that deal. There are some side quests here that I want to mention. So, it's like a little bit of a computer game, unfortunately, for everyone. So these side quests are not top priority for Trump, but they are approved side quests for the United States that are mostly led by J.D. Vance on the ideological and cultural side. Trump is the anti-ideologue. He just is not an ideologue. J.D. Vance much more. And to his buddy circle of billionaires who are the smartest people, very cunning people, and they're allowed to do their stuff. So these are the two side quests in the Trump administration. Number one, J.D. Vance is allowed to liberate Europe. And J.D. Vance is a function of Thiel to some extent, and Peter Thiel wants that. He's a little ideological. He is a much more theoretic, deeper philosophical thinker. Thiel, J.D. Vance too. They actually want to liberate Western Europe. They want to make it free again. They want to introduce free speech. In Germany, in the UK, these are the two main targets. I think Germany is the most important target for J.D. Vance. The UK is a little side target, but second most important. And they will enforce free speech. They will potentially even start building free media. And they will, of course, support alternative parties who dig these countries out of their total dependency on a very small elite that is toxic for everyone, including the United States. And I think, this is influencing these countries and you can complain about it, but I think it comes from the right. It comes from a positive impulse, right? To appreciate European culture, to appreciate the history, and to want to make it strong again. Because Europe is stronger, culturally stronger Europe is better for the United States than some Islamic Republic of London or something, which is clearly happening right now. So the second side quest is total green light. And as you can see, when I explain these things here, this is not my strategy. I'm just explaining what the strategy is. It's all debatable if that's good or bad. But the second side quest is total green light for Elon, for Tesla, for SpaceX, for XAI, for Starlink, but also for Palantir, for Anduril, for oil and gas, for all the key players in America to enrich themselves beyond their wildest dreams. So the empowerment of American key industry and the billionaire owners and leaders go into the world and take it all. That's another side quest. And that's kind of the spoils of the victors here, because, if Europe is weak, if everyone else is weak, that's just how it goes. And we need to be aware of this. In many cases, that's not the worst thing, but it's also not amazing if you are on the receiving end. Of course, we are talking here about value that's being delivered. Like if Tesla expands, if humanoid robots, Optimus buy Tesla, that will be all over the place in Europe, for example. I mean, that's very good for the European economies and technology, but would it be nicer if each country would have its own, company? Of course, but right now they're dysfunctional. So they will take advantage of that. Now, will it work? And what is the downside of this whole thing? I think it will work. I think the central perspective of Trump to see the world as a deal-making place and making money and economics number one, beating culture, beating values, beating military, is the right perspective. He's just right about it. In the end, everything flows from economics. You can't have culture, you can't have civilization, you can't have military power if you do not dominate economically. Everything starts with economics. He's completely streamlined on that side, and he's correct. So he's going to win on all these fronts, in my opinion. And it will start with Gaza, continue with Ukraine. He's just going to win and take it all. And make other people rich, by the way, and happy as a side effect. What is the negative part, the downside? Well, the downside of this whole operation is that I always view civilization as a two-condition function. The first condition is the Trump condition. You need to have absolute economic dominance. Everything has to flow through economics if you want to build a great civilization. You need to be dominant and superior in economics. But there's a second condition that Trump is blind for. And that second condition is you need to secure values, culture, and community that then operationalizes and utilizes your power in good ways for your people. I think Trump does not have that on the agenda too much. I think JD Vance is the guy who takes care of that. But that's all in the American interest. It's not necessarily in the European interest. And I think that's the magic, right? How do you develop a culture and civilization that is strong in economics and dominates? And second, that also deeply understands on a philosophical level, what are your values? What's your heritage? Where do you come from? What makes you strong? What makes you an amazing human civilization? And that needs to be cultivated. And that is a weakness of this whole Trump thing, that this is too weak. And you see this debated with MAGA, with the MAGA base, the H-1B debate, right? The gold visa debate. Do we just sell out American citizenship for $5 million, or do we need some criteria who these people are? Same with H-1Bs. Do we just let everyone in who's a little skilled and can do something? Or is there something more about America or your country than just these economic considerations? And you know my take now. There is a double condition. If you don't dominate and nail the economics, you have no say in anything. But if you nail it, you still have to add that human component, that cultural component. So what does it all mean for us? What does it mean for anyone who's a normal citizen in the United States? But also, what does it mean for you if you're in Europe? It's very important to think about geostrategy and politics, but we should not be confused. We are not in the driver's seat. You're not. I'm not. Unless you're Trump and listening. Hello. But normally we're not. We have to take care of our own lives. We have to understand these things. And all these Russia, Europe, China talk is good for the presidents. For us, it's much more important to understand that we live through the singularity, that AI is going to replace all human jobs in the next 5 years, that white collar jobs will be gone in 3 years. There's a massive, unprecedented disruption going on. We need to understand geostrategy to have the right understanding of the macro environment we are in. But we also have to face this new reality and be very smart what we do ourselves. And you know my theory. My theory is that capital will become the dominant force in the world. Not that money wasn't very important in the past, but in the future, and the future starts today, capital will be exponentially more important because labor and technology will fall to the wayside as important pieces. Technology will become ubiquitous. AI will be able to invent all technologies we need. Labor will be completely useless because AI and robots are taking over. I'm talking now, not too far out. And that means the remaining central thing is capital. Capital will decide where do we deploy AI, where do we deploy these capabilities, and where do we create new value. All the jobs will be gone. The only jobs left will be reality engineering, envisioning futures, pooling capital, deploying it with knowledge, and winning. There will be a crazy race for domination across societies all over the place. Nations will cease to be important. Capital pools will take over, not just corporations, but the owners of corporations, which includes you and me as shareholders. And well-organized capital pools will beat everyone else, including nation states. So these well-organized capital pools, that is a new concept because it means normal citizens can pool their capital and deploy it, but they have to become aware of these realities. They need to seize control of their capital, not leave it to some random banker to manage it for them. And they need to actually become extremely knowledgeable and good in deploying this capital in publicly traded stocks, in startups, and later on, when we accumulate more capital, into much more strategic operations. So I think that is the future. There's no way of debating it. You can be against it, you can cry, you can whine. It's not going to change anything. But what you can do is understand this reality and take action. The importance is in this new AI reality, a well-organized capital pool is massively more powerful than badly organized capital pools or governments. As a rule of thumb, I'm always saying if you have 10 billion in well-organized capital, which is easy to get to with a bunch of people, do the math, right? 10 billion is 10,000 people with $1 million. If you have a group on X, like we are building, you have 10,000 people, each one has $1 million in assets. Suddenly you manage $10 billion in assets. I think $10 billion in well-organized capital pools are the equivalent of $10 trillion, roughly 1,000 times more powerful. $10 trillion in government assets. Can we beat governments with an efficiency ratio of 1,000x? Of course, easy. Can we beat Wall Street and more badly organized assets with a factor of 100? Sure. Which means $10 billion are the equivalent of $1 trillion managed by some random fund. So you see where this is going. I think the future is we have to become reality engineers who understand and predict reality accurately and train ourselves in becoming very good in cold-blooded analysis of reality. We can then organize and influence this reality through capital. We can create and build new realities, and then we can scale. I think we live in the age of forced empowerment because we have no choice. We live in an age where capital becomes the all-dominating force in politics, in geostrategy, and in your personal life. We enter an age where states and governments can't do much anymore, right? They're completely dominated by capital. You see it in the United States, and you see that every other government who is not catching up to that will be ruthlessly dominated by this new US situation. Because you can whine about it. You can say that's horrible. Maybe it is, but we are not going to change it. And the United States is on a massive power trajectory right now, regardless how you personally judge it. I tell you, with Elon, with Tesla, SpaceX surrounding Trump, but also all of Silicon Valley, Angel, Palantir, all these things, you have no idea, or maybe you do, how powerful this whole mix is. And you have no idea how willing they are to deploy that power. And you have no idea how absolutely powerless Europe is in this whole thing. And Putin and Xi Jinping, even Modi, they understand these things much better than the Europeans. So they are going to be the main deal partners of Trump. I think that's the new reality. Please don't be mad at me. I'm just telling you what it is. Now we have to deal with it. You know how I think we have to deal with it, pool our capital, and actually create new civilizations that are able to play in this new playground and be effective to protect ourselves, to build a more human future. Because I do not think the whole Trump crowd actually understands these things and is actually going to build a more human future. They are pure power players who understand the power and capital game. I do not think they deeply understand civilizational principles and structures. So we cannot rely on them to save us. That's not going to happen. So we better get self-organized and do something about these realities. That's why we are building our group on X. That's why we are trading and predicting Tesla stock as the central eye of the storm of the AI revolution. And that's why I believe we need to get organized. Otherwise, there will be a major problem. Okay, I hope that was helpful. See you very soon.